hush drifts across the winter map of memory, and the Cashmere Chronicles unfurl their first silken leaf. In drawing rooms, bedrooms, and distant rail-lit cabins, listeners settle like snowflakes upon velvet, each one distinct, yet woven into the same pale quiet. The storyteller imagines soft glimmers of lamplight, glinting on every waiting page, and offers a muted invitation, should any heart feel inclined, to let the comment lines beneath this tale record, where, in the wide world, these whispered footfalls are heard. With that shy welcome breathed, the curtain folds back upon Hampshire in December of 1795. A county shimmering beneath hoarfrost as delicate and lacy as the hem of a de Dante's gown. Through furling mist stands Ash Rectory, the residence of Reverend George Lefroy, its gables stippled silver by moon-washed ice, each pane of its bow windows haloed in candle-shadowed glow. Within, hollyberries wink in deep green clusters, and the powdered hush outside is traded for the measured hum of a Christmas country ball, a gathering neither sumptuous nor sparse, but cozily scaled to the modest aspirations of gentle clergy and their circle. Across pine-scented halls, the air is steeped with warming spice. Cook's mulled wine rests in pewter jugs near the hearth, releasing threads of cinnamon and clove that wind around the skirts of passing guests. Beeswax tapers line the wall brackets. Their flames, small yet resolute, elongate every figure into flickering twin, so that those who waltz appear in doubled company, one self of substance and one self of light. A string trio, commandeered from the neighboring market town, coaxes careful notes from gut-strung instruments. The violins carry an old Oxfordshire air, brisk yet tender, while the cello murmurs a steady baritone beneath, like distant sleigh bells cushioned by snow. Gowns in damask rose, dove gray or shimmering, pistachio swirl toward the center of the long salon. Many are newly fashioned from last summer's muslin, their owners having added discreet velvet sashes or seed pearl trimming to suit the frost-kissed season. Feathered fans fluttered before flushed cheeks, and gentlemen in blue or claret superfine carry the crisp fragrance of night gardens, still clinging to their woolen collars. Laughter roams in gentle pockets, never growing boisterous enough to disturb the painted cherubs on the ceiling, yet bright enough to keep December's darker hours firmly outside the sash windows. Among the throng moves Jane Austen, 20 years of age and recently returned from a brief sojourn in Bath. She wears a sprig-patterned gown of winter cream that catches firelight, like spilled milk tinged with gold. Her dark eyes, quick with curiosity, survey the assembly as though she were simultaneously participant and observer, actress and author, the one who dances and the one who dances and the one who later on will set the dance to paper. A ribbon, the color of periwinkle twilight, binds her hair. It trembles whenever she turns, as though the ribbon itself shares in her quiet thrill. Across the room stands Thomas Lefroy, a visiting nephew of the rector, and a newly minted barrister in training. He is likewise 20, but with the kind of earnest gravity that makes 20 appear both older and younger than its actual span. Tall and trim, he wears a coat of bottle-green broadcloth, impeccably brushed, though a certain boyish strand of hair rebels against perfect order, curling above his left brow. There is Irish laughter tucked behind his polite reserve, and a scent of cold, clean air still lingers in his scarf, suggesting a recent walk across the moonlit paddock. The first notes of a country reel spill through the candlelight, and frictionless as dusk, Jane accepts a partner's hand. Yet another pair of eyes studies her from the hearthside, Mrs. Sarah Papillon, distant cousin to the rector's wife and indefatigable purveyor of polite information. Her spectacles reflect each flicker of the candles as she catalogues the subtleties of posture and glance, already composing mental paragraphs for later retelling. She notes, in particular, the moment when Mr. Channel's to be were the moment when Mr. Face. Lefroy adjusts his gloves, folds them into a neat square, and steps toward Miss Austen with an almost involuntary aim, as though a small magnet nestled beneath the polished floorboards tugs him softly in her direction. Their meeting occurs midway through a figure 8. She curtsies, he bows, the company rearranges, and suddenly they face one another beneath a sprig of waxy mistletoe that no one recalls being placed exactly there. Conversation booms in hushed cadences, audible only to them, carried between changing steps and brief, allowable pauses. Mrs. Papillon later confides to her close acquaintance that neither young person seemed conscious of any other pair of eyes, that for a score of heartbeats the world compressed itself into the measured space between an ivory-gloved palm and a linen-gloved counterpart. Mulled wine is pressed upon the dancers during an interval, and its scarlet warmth leans gracefully into every porcelain cup. Jane sips once, twice, then hides a smile behind her hand as Tom Lefroy relates an anecdote about book-laden coach journeys and the peril of reading Greek aloud while crossing rutted lanes. Their voices murmur in a corner bordered by heavy damask drapes, where lamplight collects like honey in a spoon. From there, a privileged few overhear stray phrases, your opinion of Fielding, the liveliness of Scottish judges, a preference for candid heroines, yet the connective thread of meaning, the pulse beneath the words, slips away like a wren between hedgerows. Snow continues to fall outside. Each flake stalls briefly on the chilled glass before dissolving, leaving behind a fragile lace of water that glimmers in the candlelit rooms, as though the very windows are winking at the clandestine congress within. The violins resume, and the set is called anew. Jane and Tom move into the lines, no longer tentative but attuned, their cadence perfectly matched. On one crossing they lean inward, as though an invisible confidant hovers exactly between their shoulders, urging closeness. A ripple of subdued interest rolls through the company, a sense that something unlooked for and slightly daring has gained a foothold amid the respectable festivities. At the edges of the scene, Reverend Lefroy's grey tabby cat navigates gleaming shoes and trailing ribbons, curling finally at the foot of the spinet where Miss Mary Lefroy patiently turns pages for the modest trio. Even the cat, round-eyed and faintly amused, seems aware of a shift in the room's temperature, though every hearth is well stoked. A different heat emanates now from the patterned boards, the kind kindled when two imaginations strike flint against flint. Ribbons loosen, candles gutter, yet the guests linger. A late supper of roast goose, sugared almonds, and custard tarts is announced, and the scent wafts forth in slow spirals, mingling with pine resin and beeswax. Platters gleam beneath silver covers, and Janus-faced clocks tick toward midnight. Seated side by side at the far end of the table, Jane and Tom exchange small conspiratorial glances over the rim of a single custard shared upon whim. Mrs. Papillon, unblinking behind her spectacles, counts the spoonfuls, one for him, one for her, a third, unclaimed spoonful resting like a question upon the china. A brace of young clerks from Basingstoke chatter about the latest enclosure acts, though their words float in and out of comprehension as the candle flames lengthen and smoke beyond the mullioned glass. The moon slides behind a gauze of snow cloud, turning the entire garden into a low, glowing mirror. Paths disappear, box hedges puff into mounds of sugared shadow. The night, it seems, lends permission to every tender indiscretion, so long as it be whispered and brief. Soon the guests must take their carriages or face blocked lanes by morning. Footmen in capes crunch across the drive to test the depth of drifts. Cloaks are claimed, pelisses buttoned, and farewells strewn like fading notes. Jane and Tom linger at the threshold. He lifts her plain woolen cloak onto her shoulders with theatrical care, fingers grazing the nape of her neck, but so lightly that neither polite protocol nor gossip's appetite can indict him. A single candle on the whole table sputters and goes out, as though too overcome to witness the farewell. Yet witnesses remain. Mrs. Papillon, drawing shawl tighter, catches the quiet lilt of their parting words, he promising to stop by Steventon within the week, she promising to save a particular volume of Cowper's poems for his perusal. Nothing in these pledges is overtly improper. Still, the thought hums through the older woman's mind that sometimes propriety is simply the discreet envelope around a far more provocative letter. The carriages roll away at last, wheels muffled in soft snow. Indoors, exhausted servants snuff tapers one by one, and the silvered branches of the Christmas greenery tremble faintly as warm air recedes. Only a skein of drifting ember glow remains in the grate, like an afterthought of daylight. Somewhere upstairs, a door latches, footsteps fade, and the rectangular hush of post-festivity settles deeply into the house, as comforting and heavy as a feather quilt. Of the lively exchange between Mr. Lefroy and Miss Austen, small fragments will be passed from one parlor to another over teacups in the coming days. Gossip seldom sleeps, even when the snow lies thick and every lane is hushed. Some will swear Jane's eyes shone brighter than any candle. Others will speak of Mr. Lefroy's conspicuous attention with half-admiring, half-censorious tilt of the head. Yet it is agreed that whatever spark leapt in Ash Rectory's ballroom burned subtly, bright enough for those attuned to nuance, nearly invisible to the unobservant. 7 days from this evening, a packet of letters pale sheets folded thrice, addressed in Miss Austen's neat, forward-slanting hand will leave Steventon Parsonage for London, and shortly after, another set will depart Lincoln's Inn for Hampshire. They will flutter through the postal network like snow melt, through hedgerows quick and melting, carrying inside jokes about philosophy, lines of mock flattery, perhaps even some delicate confession never meant for wider eyes. And then, astonishingly, they will vanish. Not one scrap will survive beyond fleeting mention in family recollection, as though the paper itself, too giddy or too shy, dissolved like a sugar drop upon the tongue of time. But for now, their absence lies muted in the future, unknown to every slipper-creaking footman, every half-sleeping musician, every candle stub sighing its last curl of smoke. Ash Rectory remains suspended in the hush between Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, its halls perfumed by spent spices, its floors bearing faint chalk marks of dancers' shoes. Somewhere in the darkness, a cat washes a contented paw, and 2 young hearts, one beneath the quilt at Steventon, the other rattling homeward, in a swaying chaise replay a reel, whose melody still shivers softly in their ears. Snow continues its slow descent, feathering the roof until the whole rectory seems carved from alabaster. Inside that frozen sculpture of a night, the memory of first conversation glows, like an ember cupped within invisible palms, awaiting the breath that will either coax it into flame or surrender it to ash. Thus the opening thread is spun. A frosted beginning, candlelit and cautious, stitched through with mulled wine and soft rebellion, watched by eyes keen to report every nuance, and shadowed already by the faint outline of letters destined never to be found. The story settles here for the moment, breathing quietly beneath its quilt of snow, while another dawn-gentle, rose-striped, full of promise waits beyond the next folded page. The faint glimmer of candle. Light still trembles upon the folded packet of letters resting inside its oak casket, the ink barely visible beneath layers of creased paper and careful twine. Dusk has hushed the household, and with that muted glow lingering in memory, the tale drifts back, tracing the separate childhood paths that will one day draw together like twin rivulets in a wide. In Hampshire, the village of Steventon lies snug among chalk-soft hills, veiled with a perpetual gentleness of mist. Bees roam the time-flecked hedges, ewes graze in slow-moving flocks, and the old rectory, modest yet warm, stands as the heart of parish life. Within its low rooms and sloping corridors, the second daughter of Reverend George Austen, begins to gather the quiet materials of a lively mind. Jane's mornings are tuned to the clear peal of the church bell. Before breakfast, she might slip outside, shawl loosely knotted, slippers dampened by dew, to observe how the sunrise stains the distant downs, a blush of apricot. Lessons follow. Latin phrases murmured beside a brother, French verbs shared with a sister, arithmetic chalked upon a slate whose surface shows the faint white scars of yesterday's mistakes. Yet it is storytelling that brightens her pulse. Words tumble like ribbons from her nimble thoughts to small sheets of recycled paper, and when she reads her wit aloud after supper, her siblings lean forward, half amused, half awed by the brisk sparkle of her humor. The rectory parlor seldom rests silent for long. Guests pause on their journeys between market towns, farmers call to settle tithes, a cousin arrives bearing news of Bath and reciting fashionable gossip. Jane listens. She measures the timbre of every sigh, the angle of each politely raised eyebrow, the pauses that stretch between pleasantries. Human nature chips away at its own disguises under her watchful glance. In the hush that follows a departing carriage, she stores details the way a thrifty housekeeper stores dried lavender, carefully layered, preserved for later fragrance. Steventon evenings drift toward the assembly rooms of Basingstoke or the informal hearthside dances arranged in neighboring parlors. Candles shimmer upon polished floorboards as fiddles coax out country reels. Jane's steps are quick, nimble, touched by mischief. Laughter sparks in her dark eyes whenever a partner misses a figure, or a chaperone pretends not to notice a near breach of decorum. Beneath the gaiety, the layered realities of Georgian society settle like unseen sediment. Landed gentry, professional men, tradesfolk, each ranked degree sits firmly in the collective mind, shaping invitations, expectancies, even the arc of a curtsy. Gentle though the village appears, the unspoken lines prove durable as ancient hedgerows. Far across the Irish Sea, another childhood takes shape under a sky swept by Atlantic winds. In County Longford, Thomas Langlois Lefroy is born to a large family whose fortunes sway between precarious hopes and entrenched ambition. The Lefroys trace gentle roots, yet lack the assured income of a broad English estate. Tom spends early years exploring fields bordered by mossy stone walls, his pockets carrying bits of quartz and curled leaves, his thoughts already leaping beyond the immediate horizon. Stories of London courts and eloquent barristers reach the farmhouse fire through newspapers folded and refolded by his uncle, a judge of stern demeanor and far-seeing plans. Tom learns to weigh every advantage. He practices rhetoric by addressing invisible juries of cattle and crows, letting arguments rise and twist like smoke above pasture grass. When the time comes, Trinity College in Dublin receives him. Lecture halls echo with classical quotations, the disciplined logic of Euclid, and the subtle play of oratory. Tom's friends recognize a sharp, buoyant wit, seldom cruel yet never dormant. He debates for sport, recites for pleasure, dreams of legal triumphs that might hoist his family toward firmer economic ground. A restless energy drives his footsteps along the cobbled quads, even as the weight of expectation settles across his shoulders like an academic gown repeatedly mended at the seams. Beyond each youth looms the lattice of Georgian hierarchy. England's landed families guard ancestral acres. Ireland's Protestant ascendancy navigates political unease. Town professionals inch upward on narrower rungs. Social mobility exists, but rarely without toll or tension. For a rector's daughter with modest dowry, marriage prospects depend on charm, connection, and the unpredictable generosity of relatives. For a young Irishman, advancement requires education, patronage, and the subtle smoothing of any provincial accent that might betray origin in London's polished circles. Yet within these constraints, Jane and Tom share clandestine kinships of spirit. Both prize intellect above ornament. Both cultivate humor, as shield and compass. Both feel a mild impatience toward the gentle lanes of childhood, sensing larger thoroughfares just beyond the bend. Summer afternoons in Steventon find Jane walking briskly along cart tracks, script for new tales humming at her temples. Winter twilights in Dublin find Tom pacing library aisles, legal precedents flickering like distant lanterns, before he reluctantly closes the book and dreams instead of the great metropolis across St. George's Channel. So the years unfurl. Jane sketches juvenile parodies, mock romances, burlesque histories, while her brothers pursue naval commissions or academic gowns. She attends to her mother's talk of eligible matches, yet the idea of sentimental surrender feels, for the moment, merely raw material for comedy. In Ireland, Tom sends courteous letters, home ink neat, margins narrow to assure his parents that he excels. Secretly, he hoards coins for the passage to London, for chambers in the inner temple, for wigs and gowns required by tradition, and necessary to disguise slender means. Patronage weaves in and out of both young lives like a half-visible thread. Jane's father circulates her early writing among family, the gentle approval encouraging yet inevitably tinged with caution. Literature seldom secures futures as reliably as a good marriage. Tom's influential uncle, Benjamin Langlois, arranges introductions, recommending his nephew to friends positioned along the corridors of British jurisprudence. Their successes, however, remain contingent upon abiding by the codes of class that undergird every handshake, every invitation, every whispered evaluation made across card tables and church pews. Against this backdrop, similarities shine like signals. Each possesses a talent for observation fine enough to catch the barely audible creak of a floorboard when etiquette shifts its weight. Each relishes playful debate. Each experiences moments of quiet rebellion, small, nearly imperceptible refusals to accept that rank alone should dictate affection or aspiration. Jane smiles inwardly when a pompous neighbor boasts of ancestry as though reciting scripture. Tom raises an eyebrow when a senior barrister boasts of fortune as though quoting law. These fleeting gestures are private vows. The mind must remain unshackled, even when the body moves within well-worn grooves of decorum. Still, even the keenest spirit cannot wholly elude circumstance. In Hampshire, the grand houses dotting the landscape, many down ash, the vine stand as reminders that property and inheritance rule the marriage mart as firmly as Cupid. Daughters without dowries walk narrower pathways at assemblies, their brightness admired yet often passed by when final choices fall. Meanwhile, the Austen brothers keep watch on naval half-pay and clerical stipends, ever aware that fortunes may rise or sink with the slightest ripple of war, harvest or patron's favor. Security, everyone murmurs, is worth sacrifice. In Dublin, Tom's contemporaries celebrate degrees with golden toasts, but the sparkle of their future depends on whether briefings will arrive, whether clients will appear, whether a senior partner might deign to take a promising youth under wing. The elegant facades of Georgian squares conceal rooms, let to several bachelors at once, each striving to maintain appearances that cost more than their combined incomes. Tom counts shillings, yet dreams in guineas. The dissonance rings through his thoughts, persistent as the tolling of a distant ship's bell at night. Gradually, both young lives begin to angle toward an invisible crossroad. Jane accompanies her brother and parents on visits to London, Bath, Kent, absorbing city bustle and salon chatter, transmuting it all into quiet narrative ore. She revises manuscripts in the soft lamplight, hearing within herself a voice that grows clearer, firmer, more certain of its terrain. Tom, in turn, sails to England and settles into the disciplined routine of legal study at the Inns of Court. He attends debates at Westminster, visits family in Gloucestershire, and sometimes accepts invitations to the countryside where hunting, dancing, and polite flirtation flicker against the stern march of his ambitions. The dance of obligations and desires continues, measured yet rhythmic, like the sweeping pendulum in an old hall clock. Jane's laugh circles through drawing rooms. Tom's arguments cut through moot court air. Their restlessness endures, a shared undercurrent. Neither yet imagines how soon chance will unite these parallel streams, how a winter visit will place them within the same candlelit circle, under the watchful eyes of chaperones, amidst the rustle of musical scores and the faint scent of pine logs newly kindled against frost. And when that meeting arrives, the lines of class and fortune will not have blurred. Rather, they will stand crisp, freshly inked, ready to divide what impulse may attempt to weave together. A rector's daughter possessed of brilliance but lacking portion. A young barrister in training, hemmed by obligations to family and the stern arithmetic of advancement, such are the circumstances that promise tenderness, yet threaten its endurance. The letters still folded in their oak casket testify to what transpired, though their secrets remain, for the moment, only shadows beneath sealed wax. Night inches forward. Wind presses softly against the panes of Steventon Rectory. Across the sea, it sighs through bare Irish elms. In London, it slips along stone terraces where a student pauses above his books. Invisible cords bind these places together, tuning distance into anticipation. As the last embers settle in the hearth, one might sense that the separate cadences of two promising youths are nearing a single refrain, delicate yet resolute, shaped in equal measure by affection and restraint. In the quiet pages ahead, that refrain will gather strength, echoing through assemblies, fragrant with winter greenery, threading between whispered confidences and stirring questions that time alone can smooth. But for now, the paths remain distinct, gliding onward beneath the watchful stars, toward the moment when expectation and longing first entwine. Soft darkness still lingers behind the mullioned panes, where last chapter's candle finished its patient vigil, and in that mellow afterglow the story resumes, as likely as frost reforming on a sill already touched by sunrise. In late December of 1795, the days wandered forward with deliberate, unhurried steps, each hour laying out a small square of time upon which Jane Austen and the young Irish barrister Thomas Lefroy might chance to tread together. Family calendars record little beyond parish obligations, yet her surviving letters, fragments of talk, and the rhythm of country custom allow a gentle stitching of moments into a comprehensive, almost whispered, tapestry. Tuesday, the 22nd settles first, wrapped in a pewter sky. Shot in fields, bald in the hedgerows yet softly plumed by overnight snow, invite a mid-morning walk. Jane, bonnet tied loosely to accommodate the curve of her cheek against the cold, leaves Steventon Rectory for the lane toward Ash. Thomas overtakes her near the fork where beech branches form an archway. He lifts his hat with what she later calls a very gentlemanlike carriage. Conversation slides easily to Scott's newly bound collected poems, a volume they both have read beneath different roofs. Footfall follows footfall, and the white hush around them seems to listen. On Wednesday, the 23rd, the household stirs earlier, for Mrs. Austen means to drive into Basingstoke before the shopkeepers close for the holiday. Space inside the carriage is scarce. Tom, having lodged at Ash with his Lefroy cousins, meets the rector's brood near the stable yard. Horses snort plumes of silver vapor. Leather harness creaks. With mild commotion, the young people rearrange themselves, Jane sliding sideways on the narrow seat, Tom bracing an ungloved hand along the polished rail, so she need not jostle. Through rattling lanes they travel, hedges blanketed, distant fields as smooth as sifted sugar. She will later write to Cassandra of our charming expedition, though the soles of my half-boots were never in such danger. A line that conceals more delight than complaint. Observant brothers notice, Henry's eyebrows arch. James coughs into his scarf, yet a conspiratorial warmth nestles beneath their teasing. Christmas Eve dawns brighter, lending the air a tremulous crystal quality. Preparations buzz within the rectory, but outside, the stillness of Chalkdown spreads wide and persuasive. After breakfast, Jane escapes with her sister-in-law Mary, intent on gathering holly. Near the orchard gate, Tom appears, ostensibly searching for the same scarlet-berried branches. The trio wanders, Mary soon detained by the discovery of a broken ladder rung in need of her management. Snow squeaks beneath the remaining pair. They speak of the law courts, of Dublin rumour, of novels, and of Fielding's wit. A robin darts across their path like a spark in the white, and Jane notes how its sudden brightness suits the quick intelligence in Tom's eyes. Candlelight that evening glows warmer for the memory. Christmas Day brings liturgy and lace-edged handkerchiefs, the smell of evergreens pressed against pew ends. Jane's letter of the following week preserves a single sentence about the service. He looks so well beneath the arch of ivy that I could scarcely attend to. Anthem. Afterwards, the Lefroys dine with the Austens. Silver covers lifted, fires crackling. The talk ranges easily. Prospects at the Inns of Court, the merits of carols newly popular in town, whether King Arthur's legend suit winter storytelling. Mrs. Austen's keen gaze misses little, but her smile, though thoughtful, remains untroubled. Perhaps she, too, recalls her own youthful midwinter overtures. That night, small parcels appear on pillows. Jane finds a folded page of Milton that Tom had remarked upon 2 days earlier, ciphered at the margin with a neat translation into French. No name, yet no doubt. Boxing Day, the 26th, unfolds in sociable procession. A throng of neighboring families convenes at the Lefroy home, all walnut-wood floors and garlands. Gossip flutters faintly, yet not in open wings. It perches, waiting. Amid quadrilles and country reels, Tom chooses Jane for 2 dances, when custom expects merely 1. Her cheeks, already flushed by movement, bloom further at the reprisal. James Austen teasingly observes that perpetual partners invite censure, though the sparkle in his eyes softens the reproof. Mrs. Lefroy, Tom's aunt, watches without interference. In the cool corridor between sets, Tom and Jane linger near a window rimmed with fern-like frost. Moonlight sprites through the glass, rendering the outdoors a negative image of itself, dark branches drawn upon white earth. Their breath casts twin clouds on the pane. Neither speaks, yet some accord settles, unvoiced and unmistakable. Sunday the 27th sees the usual sermon, though the congregation's focus is divided. Word of the previous evening's harmonies, and of certain exchanged looks, has already rippled beyond those present, curling like smoke through Hampshire drawing rooms. Hats tilt and whispers flicker. Jane feels the subtle scrutiny, but allows her thoughts to drift toward the rhythm of Tom's turning pages when he read aloud at Ash, the night before Goldsmith, chosen for merriment. She recalls how the room's laughter rested upon the gentle self-assurance of his voice, and how the candle between them leaned, wick glowing as though eager to listen. A quiet and Monday follows. Snow deepening. The Austens' gig cannot safely manage the lanes, so Tom arrives on borrowed hack, his coat powdered white at the shoulders. He joins the family in the parlor where Jane is deciphering music for the small pianoforte. Henry hands over a newspaper while simultaneously catching his sister's eye. the gesture hinting at both concern and complicity. Tom stands close enough to admire the notation, yet keeps the respectful fraction of an inch that propriety demands. They discuss the soldier's joy, finding in its lively strain a reflection of the season's mingled cheer and transience. Tuesday, the 12th night short of actual 12th night, breaks open to brilliant sun upon the snow crust, turning every path into scattered diamonds. Jane and Tom, escorted nominally by Henry, wend toward Dean Wood. Here the country tangles itself into quiet corridors of holm, oak, and ash. Crisp leaves remain beneath the crystalline layer, so the ground gives a soft sigh with each step. Henry is soon distracted by the errand of tracing a rabbit's path, leaving the pair to leisurely cadence. They speak of Bath, of the theaters Tom might visit during term, and of how characters on a page sometimes rebel against their author. She later writes that he laughed at my folly in supposing even my little creations could do so. Yet the sentence sparkles with satisfaction at being taken seriously. Wednesday, the 30th, turns the corner toward year's end. Sentiment thickens like the well-spiced syllabub Mrs. Austen prepares. In the study, James reads correspondence from London, a relative hints that Tom's time in Hampshire must soon conclude. Conversation at supper dips into small silences. Afterward, within the withdrawing room, Tom opens a well-worn copy of Johnson's Rasselas and asks Jane her opinion of the prince's search for happiness. The philosophical weight hovers, yet she answers lightly, noting that contentment may rest not in exotic wanderings but in recognizing the value of one's present company. His smile at that moment is recorded nowhere, but family memory later transmits it like a lingering ember. On Thursday, New Year's Eve, invitations crowd the mantel. Mrs. Digweed offers afternoon tea. The Biggs call upon the rectory at dusk. Each domestic threshold crossed expands the radius of observation. Every gloved hand that clasps Jane's seems to measure rumor's temperature. By now the phrase, very gentlemanlike, has echoed from her letter to Cassandra into half a dozen parlors, acquiring shades of meaning beneath the veneer of courtesy. Mrs. Austen arranges her daughter's shawl with a pensive pat, as though smoothing imagined creases from the future. Mr. Austen, mild and mindful, writes in his diary, "Only that fine company today. Jane looked well." Silence, when shaped by affection, can resemble approval. Midnight bells usher in 1796. Within the Lefroy, household music lingers. The younger cousins sing carols until voices fade. In a side room, Tom and Jane share a last conversation of the old year, observed solely by the sleepy spaniel at their feet. They exchange modest hopes, his for professional distinction, hers for steady creativity. He quotes a Latin tag. She counters with a piece of cowper, and between their breaths another sort of language unfolds, one made entirely of pauses and softened regard. The first dawn of January is pale rose over the frost-netted meadows. Obligations tug Tom toward his uncle's study while Jane attends to younger nieces. It is merely a day, yet gossip seizes new momentum. Mrs. Powlett remarks to Mrs. Devon that Miss A and the Irish gentleman seem exceedingly attached, a sentence soon distilled into speculation about bands and settlements. The countryside's winter stillness becomes, paradoxically, the perfect sounding board for echoing talk. In one drawing room, the rumor is met with arch amusement, in another with warm hope, in a third with gentle apprehension that poetry and prudence seldom dance in easy tandem. Sunday, the 3rd of January, closes the vicarage. Christmas celebrations with a modest soiree. Candle stubs burn low. Scents of pine, orange peel, and twine hang in the air. Jane's eyes follow Tom as he exchanges farewells, his trunk already strapped for departure early next week. Yet any sadness drifts quietly beneath composed smiles. Their restraint possesses its own hush, like snow muffling the land. She later writes to Cassandra that he pressed my hand with a kindness I shall not forget, confessing also to a momentary heaviness of heart, quickly mastered, Beneath the calm phrasing lies all the stirred water of a pond beneath thin ice. Throughout these 10 recorded days, the family's reactions thread a subtle counterpoint. Henry's light-hearted ribbing never crosses into cruelty. James's caution remains mild. Elizabeth and Mary weave gentle conspiracies of protective supervision. Mr. Austen, by granting Tom unlimited access to the rectory library, tacitly conveys trust. And Mrs. Austen, who knows that daughters must sometimes hazard the edge of happiness to learn its topography, chooses to let conversation travel where it may. While she polishes the silver for Twelfth Night, snow begins to soften. Cart tracks reappear, the relentless drip of thaw setting a new tempo. Along with meltwater, talk courses faster through cottages and manor houses alike. The alignment of 2 young lives has captivated a district starved for novelty during the sleepy season. Some predict engagement before the crocuses rise. Others, recalling Tom's uncertain fortune, wager on a polite retreat. For Jane and Tom themselves, the corridor of possibility narrows beneath these watching eyes, and every meeting now must negotiate not just mutual inclination, but the weight of expectation. Yet, for one final afternoon, the world gives them reprieve. On the 5th, they walk toward Ash again, this time escorted by Mrs. Lefroy herself. Across the fields, the snow lies in tired, gray-smudged drifts, but near a copse of alder, the ground is clear enough to reveal delicate shoots, winter aconite green fingertips reaching for a distant warmth. Mrs. Lefroy lingers to examine them. The younger pair steps ahead. Words are few, for so much has already been said or felt. At a stile, Tom offers his gloved hand, and Jane accepts. The gesture, though ordinary, seals the quiet progress of the previous fortnight, more firmly than any speech. Evening drops early, candles flutter inside the rectory windows, summoning travelers homeward. As Tom turns back toward Ash, the air quivers with approaching change, coach wheels to be greased, London streets awaiting his stride, ink yet to dry on the final letter Jane will dispatch to Cassandra. Behind him, her figure recedes into the amber glow of household lamplight, slender, composed, a silhouette someone might one day embroider upon memory's sampler. Outside, a breeze stirs through hedges, pressing faint music from the bare twigs. It carries away the last unstable notes of the Christmas season and bears forward the softer, steadier chords of ordinary time. These, in turn, will shape what comes next. Resolutions, departures, and the muted courage required whenever hearts must weigh themselves against the world's measuring glance. Snow continues melting, and with each drop a quiet secret seems to spill toward the earth, nourishing unseen seeds. Among those seeds lies the promise of January's impending assemblies, and of a certain assembly in particular, where choices will clarify beneath chandeliers and sprung floorboards. But that is a gentler chapter still ripening in the distance, waiting for its own calm recounting. The candle that faded at the close of the previous reverie still glows, though its flame has traveled a little lower down the pale shaft of wax, casting a mellower circle over the small writing table at Steventon. Outside the casement, December rain beats softly on the glass, yet inside the air remains seasoned with lavender and the faint mineral scent of ink long dried. That modest light, trembling but unafraid of the dark corridor beyond, now reveals the true protagonists of this quiet chapter. Folded sheets, slanted lines, and the muted crackle of sealed paper that has sailed, miraculously, across 2 centuries, spread across green bays in the Bodleian, and carefully sleeved in tinted parchment in the British Library. There lie 161 letters whose ink still grips the fibers of laid paper with stubborn intimacy. Each sheet carries Jane Austen's brisk, looping hand, the ascenders bold, the descenders clipped, and each one was once folded inwards to create its own envelope, addressed in the corner to sister, brother, friend. They rustle like dry meadow grass when scholars turn them, yet they retain a warmth that refuses archived chill. as though the writer has merely left the room to fetch more sand for blotting. An inventory begins, hushed and almost ceremonial. 32 letters from the early Hampshire years, 74 from Bath and Southampton, 21 from the settled Chawton cottage, 29 that shuttle between publishers, nephews, and naval brothers, 5 whose origin remains a misted guess, and then, like a breath caught in the throat of time, appears a winter hiatus 6 bare weeks, stretching from the middle of December into late January, unrepresented by a single surviving sheet. The catalogers note the silence in red pencil, but the space remains wider than any margin they can draw. In that silent span, the shortest day yields to the longed-for tilt of light. Christmas ivy withers into Epiphany snowdrops, and parish bells ring for Twelfth Night dances. Yet from Jane's pen there arrives no playful report, no teasing verdict on gowns or partners, no sketch of weather or witticism. What words slip through that quiet chasm? An answer stirs only in shadows, but the emptiness itself speaks a purposeful omission, perhaps, or a loss accidental yet curiously exact, as though someone had taken careful scissors to a single bright ribbon inside an otherwise intact skein. To imagine what was trimmed, one must first recall the making of such ribbons. On winter mornings, Jane selected from a pot of goose quills, preferring those whose barbs, when ruffled, still whispered of flight over Micheldever fields. She trimmed the nib at a slanted angle with sewing scissors, ran the point once along her tongue for sharpness, and tested the flow against a scrap ruled with faint pencil lines. The feather's hollow shaft, light as a hollow reed, balanced between agile fingers and the steady pulse that animated her thoughts. Near the hearth, a small stoneware bottle of iron gall ink waited, dark as blackberry juice, yet metallic when stirred. A tilt released a tang of ochopal, iron vitriol, and vinegar. The scent rose brisk and faintly astringent, mingling with coal smoke. When the nib broke the surface, minute ripples trembled like winter water disturbed by a blackbird's foot. Fresh upon the page the ink shimmered blue, then dried to a deep brown, each word setting as though forged, impervious to later smudge, yet vulnerable, paradoxically, to the slow burn of deliberate fire. Finished pages bore wafer seals, small crimson circles made of flour gum and the tiniest pinch of pigment. Jane breathed upon them, soft breath booming the starch, pressed the moistened wafer between the final folds, and watched color bleed outward, like a secret flush. No wax strip, no signet spoke, only the neat wafer kept privacy, modest and tidy, trusting that hands at the other end would peel it open with equal care. Sometimes a stray crumb still clings beside her signature, a fragile fossil of the moment when private thoughts braced themselves to travel. Throughout the operation, the only music was the stroke of quill across wove paper, a whispering sequence broken here and there by a brisk tap to dislodge excess ink, or the quiet exclamation of a thought delighted at its own arrival. The rhythm settled into the room like slow rain on thatched roof, and family voices in the passage instinctively lowered. Such habitual serenity is woven into every extant letter. Turn any one of them today, and somewhere between the lines the listener can still discern that hushed domestic metronome. Stay. Scholars, leaning over the glass cases, sometimes forget to breathe while they follow those strokes. Beneath magnification they observe the shallow furrows where the quill pressed more firmly in moments of emphasis. Tiny embankments of fiber that still cast shadows under oblique light. They map abbreviations, count dashes. Notice how an impatient hand dots an I before the stem is complete. In these microtopographies of expression, they glimpse mood-light irony, lifting pressure, sudden indignation, sharpening it. The text and texture mingle, telling a story inseparable from the physical dance that produced it. Within those lines dwell unmistakable cadences that will later reverberate through Pride and Prejudice. A sly reversal of expectation delivered in a single clause. An arch semicolon joining two ideas that faint toward disagreement before confessing secret harmony. A gleaming pair of adjectives, equal in syllables, tipped with the faintest irony. These are her linguistic fingerprints. One December letter, commenting on a neighbor's clumsy compliment, concludes, "He meant to be civil, and was in fact almost eloquent with the attempt." The sentence anticipates Elizabeth Bennet's airy verdicts on Mr. Darcy, long before Darcy stands at the Meryton Assembly, even absent the full company of her fiction. The letters disclose Lizzie's bright laughter, Mrs. Bennet's staccato alarm, Mr. Bennet's languid wit. In swift asides to Cassandra, Jane tests dialogue like silver spoons against porcelain. She measures how much teasing a phrase can carry before it rattles, how gently affection may hide behind feigned indifference. Each experiment, logged casually across a sheet of paper, foreshadows ballroom banter and carriage-side skirmishes yet to be composed. The laboratory is domestic, but the results, distilled in ink, will wander far beyond the parlor, into parlors of countless future readers. Against this lively tableau, the December-January gap glows with heightened possibility. Could those missing pages have contained the first thrilling confession of admiration for the young Irish lawyer recently arrived in Hampshire, the quick-witted Tom Lefroy, whose dark lashes and debated prospects stirred more than one local heart? Might there have been plans for clandestine walks after evening card parties, or an exchange of New Year vows couched in jest to evade parental unease? Perhaps amid the crush of holiday guests, Jane hid affectionate exaggerations tailored solely for Cassandra, laughing at her own audacity as the quill flew. Such speculation remains a quiet exercise. Yet the emotional weather it predicts feels plausible. That buoyant uncertainty which colors early attachment, the hush of drawing, room corners where glances ricochet faster than words. The near, if the absent letters did indeed hold these bright kernels, their vanishing leaves a soft ache, like the echo of music once played in an adjoining chamber now emptied of sound. The gap, therefore, carries its own narrative weight, the negative image of intimacy. No figure stands closer to that negative image than Cassandra. She is the first custodian of the paper hoard, the quiet sentinel who gathers ties and occasionally judges. In later years, when the Reverend's daughters no longer share a bedroom alcove, she returns to the bundles, slips the violet ribbon, and rereads. Her pulse knows which pages quicken memory too keenly, which sentences might invite prying conjecture from future nieces or prouder biographers. She stacks those chosen sheets aside, lips pressing themselves into a line as spare as an empty margin. Some she destroys outright, feeding them to a small iron grate whose bars glow like ruddy lace at dusk. Others she trims with a steady scissor, excising single paragraphs, sometimes simply a name or date, then resealing the aperture with a discreet diagonal crease. The surviving evidence of her hand is subtle, ragged edges camouflaged by time, occasional slight stutter in pagination, an envelope addressed but lacking its cargo. She leaves, thereby, faint traces of hesitation, a censorship, gentle yet irrevocable, born of love, protection, and perhaps a hint of proprietary grief. In this stillness the narrative pauses, not to clang shut but to draw a softer curtain. The lamp on Jane's desk gutters. A last ember settles among the ashes Cassandra once stirred. Somewhere on that unrecorded winter night, a heart may have opened and closed again before anyone could capture the sound. The next chapter will follow the ripple outward, stepping lightly toward Dublin drawing rooms, and Lefroy's lingering smile, seeking clues in circuitous memoirs and chancery records. Yet for now the letters rest, folded, breathing a whisper of smoke and violets into the quiet air. The winter twilight that had settled over Steventon at the close of our previous reflection lingers still. like a dusky veil drawn across familiar fields, yet by dawn it has thinned to a translucent silver. In the rectory garden, frost traces the last rose leaves, while a faint plume of chimney smoke curls quietly upward, carrying with it the serene expectations of an ordinary January day. Inside, Jane lingers near the window where last evening she watched the final lantern extinguished at ash, her thoughts resting on the shy warmth of a hand clasped not 12 hours before. She cannot know that before another sunset, that warmth will be recalled only as a quickly fading imprint. News travels in Steventon with the measured gait of a cart horse, but on this brittle morning it arrives at a gallop, borne by the brisk knock of a groom and the official seal of Lincoln's Inn. Thomas Lefroy, spending the Christmas season under the hospitable roof of his Hampshire relations, is summoned to London without delay, the letter heavy with paternal counsel and the expectation of an eminent legal career. The ink is firm, uncompromising. Chambers await. Tutors prepare their ledgers, and a bench of learned surgeons anticipates the eager mind of their newest student. In that single page, the airy interlude of youth is folded abruptly away. Whispers begin at once. Some trace the haste to Tom's uncle in Ireland, mindful of limited funds and wary that a prolonged idle visit might threaten a necessary frugality. Others, more attuned to village undercurrents, lift their brows toward Ash Parsonage, where Mrs. Anne Lefroy is said to weigh romance and prudence with rigorous attention. The lady's affection for Jane has never been questioned. Her admiration for Tom is equally sincere. Yet to the careful observer she places concern for both young hearts beneath the heavier mantle of responsibility. If she indeed dipped a discreet quill into that summons, no mark betrays her, yet the suspicion settles like mist upon water. Preparations proceed with soft but relentless industry. A portmanteau is aired, its brass fittings burnished, and books of Blackstone are gathered from scattered shelves. Tom walks through each task as though in a dream, courteous, composed, almost distant, while the household hums with efficient gravity. Only when he steps outside to the paddock, where a low winter sun glances off the frozen grass, does the mask slip. There, stripped of listeners, he presses a gloved fist to his lips, recalling the quick breath of laughter he shared with a certain bright-eyed partner at Wednesday's assembly, and the unspoken question that hovered, trembling like the last note of the musician's concluding bow. Within the rectory, Jane learns the news from Cassandra, who, gentle as ever, smooths the message before offering it. Jane reads twice, her eyes moving slowly, as though by altering the pace the meaning might reshape itself. It does not. She is reminded of lines in a half-finished novel, characters scattered by inheritance, duty, or the cruel convenience of distance. For a long moment she stands unmoving, listening to the clock tick against the hearth. Then, without bustle, she folds the paper, returns it to her sister's hand, and turns toward the writing desk. A scrap of cream wove lies ready, ink patiently waiting in the well, witness to what must be said. The farewell dance is arranged almost as an afterthought, a small gathering at Dean intended to soften the sudden parting. Folklore, embroidered over decades by curious admirers, has since painted the evening as Twelfth Night, bright with candlelit garlands and daring whispers beneath boughs of holly. Parish registers, however, speak more modestly. An unspectacular weekday at January start, chairs pushed back to make room, fiddles persuaded from hearth-side hooks. Whichever chronicle one trusts, the music begins the same, an unobtrusive strain, rising into the steady figure of a country set. Jane takes her place opposite Tom, each bowing to the other with formal grace that scarcely conceals a trembling undercurrent. Their last dance is not one of spiraling waltzes, those would come to England later, but a simple measured reel, partners arrayed in two lines, stepping forward, retreating, crossing, turning. At each meeting their eyes lock with grave joy, acknowledging the brevity allotted to them. In the pattern's easy geometry, they find a temporary eternity, the figures repeating, folding back, promising return. Yet even eternity must bow to the musician's final cadence. When the tune dwindles, Tom lifts Jane's hand to his lips in the polite manner of his country, though the pressure lingers a heartbeat longer than courtesy demands. With that slight sacrilege, the evening draws gently to its end. Dawn of departure arrives cold, pale, and completely unsentimental. Hooves scrape the stable yard. Vapor rises from the horses like ghostly banners. Inside, breakfast is set out but barely tasted. The goodbye itself transpires in the hall, beneath a shaky bar of sunlight slanting through the fanlight. Words prove unequal to the moment. Tom gives thanks to his hosts, turns to Cassandra with a brother's respect, then faces Jane. What he says is not recorded, only that she received it with composure. Gloves touch, eyes drift for a last silent exchange, and then the carriage door closes. Wheels grind against gravel, carrying promise and uncertainty toward the distant smoke of London. The rectory settles after his leaving with the uneasy quiet that follows a sudden storm. Jane, who has always turned emotion into narrative, now attempts the safer refuge of chores, mending cuffs, sorting seeds, reading the day's homily aloud to her mother. None succeed in stilling the restless rhythm beneath her ribs. At twilight she retreats to the small dressing room upstairs, where frost feathers the panes and a spill of candlelight leaves the corners tenderly shadowed. She opens her portable writing desk, selects a single sheet, and composes a note whose precise phrasing has eluded historians, save for the closing sentiment. I think of you incessantly, yet shall endeavor to be reasonable. That letter, folded neatly, sealed with a wafer-tinted rose, is entrusted to the regular mail coach bound north through Basingstoke. It never reaches Lincoln's Inn, or if it does, no trace remains among Tom's surviving papers. Perhaps a mishap in the sorting office, a careless drop into a puddle, or the simple discretion of a family member who guessed at its contents. The route from heart to hand is perilous and often invisible. Jane receives no reply, only the everyday silence of city life ongoing beyond her knowledge. Days lengthen by a scant minute each morning, yet absence expands far more rapidly than daylight. On the mantel above her desk, she keeps a sprig of dried myrtle from the Dean Assembly, its scent long vanished, its color dimmed to muted sage. It serves as both talisman and testimony. Whenever she pauses in her sketches of Catherine or Eleanor or the Bennet girls unborn, her gaze returns to that fragile sprig, and the air between memories quickens. There is melancholy, certainly, but threaded through with a curious gratitude. She has touched the tremor of first love. Now she must decide how to house it within imagination, where it can neither injure nor be injured, but may instead confer breath upon invented worlds. Outside, February storms gather, tearing the last leaves from oak and elm, yet inside the rectory, a gentle industry endures. Sermons are copied, Mrs. Austen's preserves are labeled. The pianoforte is tuned anew. Cassandra, perceptive, allows her sister space, but not isolation. She nudges a volume of Cowper into Jane's hands, suggests a walk when sunlight briefly appears, and sits sewing beside her in companionable silence. From these small ministrations, Jane draws sufficient ease to begin another chapter of her youthful novel in progress, though every so often ink blots at the mention of an earnest young man. She sands the page, and emotion settles again into manageable quiet. In the first week of March, a plain parcel arrives from London addressed to Reverend Austen, containing only pamphlets on parliamentary reform and a brief family notice. Nothing within pertains to Jane, yet folded among the news sheets she finds a blank corner torn away from a larger letter, the paper identical to her own favored stock. No handwriting, no seal, just the faintest suggestion of lost words. She places it beneath the myrtle sprig, letting possibility rest alongside remembrance. Beyond the pain, snowdrops tilt their white bells, promising that concealed beneath the earth, green things continue their quiet work. Somewhere beyond the downs, a band of high clouds drifts eastward, carrying the muted echo of traffic along the Portsmouth Road, and Jane listens to that distant murmur as though it were the soft wheel of an unseen mail coach. Patience is a quiet talent, she reminds herself, perhaps the gentlest form of courage. She breathes once, slowly, and the room fills with watchful, reassuring hush. Soft. Of the vanished correspondence we shall speak gently when the chronicle resumes. Twilight still clung to the dew-pierred orchard where the previous chapter left its lingering breath, and the hush of hushed leaves seemed to carry forward into this new reverie. Over the gentle undulations of Hampshire, a muted moon washed the worn brick of Chawton Cottage in diluted silver, as though careful not to wake the stories slumbering inside. Those stories fragile, ink-lined, and folded by familiar hands had once filled cupboards and reticules alike, yet only faint echoes remained. It is into that soft space between presence and absence that the tale drifts tonight, following the pale drift of chimney smoke upwards. Not 2 years had passed since Jane's final breath when Cassandra, elder sister and sentinel of memory, stood before the parlor grate with a shoebox of letters balanced against her silent heart. The fire muttered in low marmalade hues. No crackle, no spark, only the steady sigh of old timber turning to ember. One by one she fed the paper to the glow, watching handwriting she knew as intimately as her own dissolve into floating cinders. Some sheets resisted, curling like pale petals, but none survived. The room smelled of lavender ink, hot wax, and an irrevocable decision that night. Yet Cassandra's vigil did not cease with the single shoebox. Summer after summer, whenever house-guests thinned and the turtle-doves cooed drowsily beyond the orchard wall, she returned to her quiet task. Drawers yielded bundles bound in blue ribbon. Traveling desks surrendered packets carefully stitched in coarse thread. Each dispatch flickered, flared, and fell apart, until the grate itself seemed lined with invisible sentences. The nieces, Anna and Caroline, glimpsed the ritual from the half-open doorway, their young faces ghost-lit by flame, unable to decide whether they watched a sacrament or a sacrifice. Both kinds left ashes that settled on conscience. Later, when the girls were grown and the cottage belonged to other caretakers, they remembered those evenings in unguarded whispers. They spoke of stacks upon stacks of thin, closely written sheets, of endearing asides to family, of teasing lines that hinted at pleasures of the heart, and of rarer letters whose margins trembled with disappointment. They wondered what danger such pages could possibly pose in an age already dimming into nostalgia. Their testimonies drifted outward, carried by scholarly inquiry and fireside gossip alike, until the burned letters became a presence more potent than any that survived within parlors and libraries. But another rumor, quieter still, clung to the corners of the narrative like a sprig of dried myrtle pressed between pages. It spoke of a locked walnut box, small enough to nestle beneath a shawl, yet heavy with expectation, allegedly carried by Cassandra on a final journey to Portsmouth. Inside, according to the hush of generations, lay letters too luminous to burn. Perhaps the earliest playful notes exchanged between Jane and youthful Tom Lefroy, perhaps later, longer confessions penned when memory and longing had matured together. No key was ever found upon her person, nor shadow traced its final resting. The ethical murmur began soon after, respectful yet persistent, like rain tapping an attic pane, in shielding her sister's privacy against a future neither could foresee. Or did the destruction deny posterity the honest complexity of a beloved voice? Clergymen argued duty. Novel readers pleaded for candor. Archivists calculated the loss in folios and footnotes. Through every argument ran an unspoken recognition that ink can outlive bone, and that sometimes love, in striving to protect, erases the very soul it seeks to save. Yet the question never settled. roaming corridors of scholarship and hearth alike gently. Decades drifted. Paint cracked, latches rusted, papers recatalogued. Still the phantom correspondence shimmered at the edge of candlelight, appearing whenever someone unfolded a surviving letter and sensed a pause where another sheet once belonged. It was during the mild spring of 1893 that a retired sea captain, distantly related to the Knight family, produced a hand-drawn chart marking possible cache, Miss C, in looping emerald ink. The chart stitched together 3 quiet geographies: Chawton Cottage, the old Lefroy estate at Ash, and a storage loft in the Irish Registry, where Tom's uncle had once served as Registrar of Deeds. The map soon passed from hand to patient hand, acquiring pencil notes in the margins like polite gossip. Beneath the apple boughs of Chawton, seekers measured floorboards and pried at discolored skirting, always replacing each plank with almost devotional care. At Ash, ivy-laced stone staircases were traced step by step while skylarks circled above, unconcerned with human constancy. In Dublin, archivists unrolled brittle naval ledgers, half hoping a domestic envelope might have slipped between pages of nautical payroll, yet only the faint perfume of salt and dust greeted them. Hope nevertheless lingered, like music remembered, after the instrument is packed away. In quiet rooms far from these excursions, scholars reconstructed possibilities. Could Cassandra have meant to lighten, not erase, her sister's legend retaining only the letters that sound, casting away those that sobbed? Or, knowing the fragility of reputation in a world quick to judge women's hearts, did she vow that no careless reader would mind Jane's vulnerability for gossip? Memories of Tom Lefroy, the quick-eyed Irish barrister who once twirled Jane around a winter parlor, haunted such discussions. What tender admissions might have survived inside the walnut box? Regret, reconciliation, perhaps a graceful farewell. Neither ever posted before time carried them. Not every search was sober. One autumn, a pair of whimsical antiquarians smuggled divining rods into Chawton's herb garden, convinced that elderwood would tremble above buried love letters, just as surely as above underground water. The rods dipped obligingly, though later examination revealed only an old horseshoe and a cache of marbles once lost by Edward Austen's children. Another visit ended in gentle embarrassment when a hopeful reader discovered that her secret compartment was merely a warped drawer swollen by humidity. In each misstep, affection rather than avarice guided the pursuit, and so embarrassment softened into laughter under moonlit corridors. Meanwhile, the debate over preservation versus privacy slid quietly into modern lecture halls, carried beneath the clatter of microfilm machines and the glow of digitized facsimiles. Some argued for the moral right of the dead to keep their silences. Others cited the creative nourishment that unguarded archives provide to future imaginations. Yet, whenever a surviving scrap of Jane's handwriting surfaced, perhaps a playful recipe, perhaps a stern admonition to a publisher, the room invariably fell into the same respectful hush, as though all present were listening for the faint rustle of letters already consumed by flame, haunting microphones of modern scholarly air. Caroline's eldest daughter, long since grey, offered an image that often visits researchers in twilight reverie. She recalled her mother describing an entire drawer filled with the thinnest paper Jane could procure, the ink crossing the fibers so minutely that sunlight shone through words like stained glass. The drawer, she believed, was half emptied before Cassandra's resolve subsided, and the remainder sent onward to a distant cousin whose parsonage possessed a sturdier lock. Whether that cousin honored Cassandra's intention or quietly preserved the manuscripts, no one can say. History keeps its secrets by distributing them across parish lines and lifetimes. Slowly, attention returned to the walnut box itself. Cabinet makers measured period hinges, noting that a lock of that style could be sprung by a skeleton key no larger than a crochet hook. Conservators compared varnish recipes, reasoning that a faint trace of walnut oil in an attic might reveal lost cargo. Still, the box evaded schedules and spreadsheets, as though content to remain a rumor. In its imagined hollowness, countless readers placed their own versions of a love that could not wholly fade, each convinced that a single perfect sentence slept beneath polished grain, awaiting soft daylight of revelation. The seasons turn, and Chawton's orchard blossoms, as reliably as ever, yet every petal that falls onto the cottage sill seems to echo the drifting ash of letters long gone. The mystery has mellowed rather than sharpened with time, settling into the mind like the low hum of a distant brook, a presence that reassures as much as it intrigues. For whether the hidden cache is discovered tomorrow or never, the absence itself has become a gentle companion to the novels, inviting endless rereadings, encouraging hearts to imagine what might have stirred Jane's pen in winter twilight beside lamplight's quiet shimmer. Some say that the surest path to whatever truth remains will not be found beneath floorboards or behind briar, but rather in the damp ledgers of maritime routes charted between Southampton and Cork, routes Tom Lefroy travelled in youth and later in duty. There, amid tides and tally marks, lies the faint pattern of crossings that may guide the wandering dream toward Ireland once more. And so, as candle wicks dwindle in the Hampshire night, the narrative prepares to follow the sea breeze westward, where ancient shelves and whispered Gaelic might yet reveal another clue, waiting among ink-damp parchments there. Night had settled over the vicarage garden that closed the preceding reflection, the ghostly scent of hawthorn drifting above the stone sundial where imaginary letters had been laid a moment before. From that fragrant stillness the story now glides onward, as though the soft wind that turned the pages were also turning time itself. Unhurried, the narrative slips past hedgerows of memory, lantern light pooling in quiet corners, until it reaches the familiar great house at Meryton, whose shutters tremble with anticipation of a revelation. Within that imagined house stands Fitzwilliam Darcy, composed yet restless, the blue of midwinter dusk caught in his gaze. Opposite him, Elizabeth Bennet watches with the bright alertness of a woodland bird, refusing to be cowed by wealth or wounded pride. Scholars have long traced the faint silhouette of Tom Lefroy behind this celebrated pair, noting how the reserved young Irishman whom Austen met during a few sparkling assemblies supplied a living outline for Darcy's haughty gravity, and perhaps also for Elizabeth's quickened curiosity, for her teasing delight in puncturing pretension and uncovering the kindness beneath the armor of silence. In the remembered candlelight of Steventon's winter balls, Tom's thoughtful pauses, his earnest eyes that weighed a remark before replying, and his constrained pockets that still could not cloak ambition, all appear in Darcy's reluctant admiration and in his startled smile at Elizabeth's laughter. Equally, Jane's own adolescent daring, the gleam of a provincial girl, testing the boundaries of conversation flows into Elizabeth's quick retorts. Through this merging of trait and temperament, the novel enshrines a meeting that history insists lasted only a handful of evenings. Fiction, however, stretches that handful into an enduring dance, step after step across printed parquet floors. A faint rustle of paper seems to travel across the hush, and the confession Darcy later sets before Elizabeth in inked lines unfurls again. "You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you." The voice within the page trembles, yet persists, much like the voice that might have visited Tom's pocket had societal caution not intervened. There is sweetness in the tension ardent yet restrained, pronounced yet private. Between the printed syllables one can sense an unfinished sentence meant for another recipient, folded away, scented by pine logs and the distant rattle of carriage wheels outside. So many letters never written, or written and destroyed, drift like snowflakes through the chronicles of early love. They melt before they reach the ground, yet leave a cool impression upon the soil of the novels. This shimmer of absence becomes a literary device and a quiet protest, for every missing sheet invites the reader to dream between paragraphs. Austen, who burned her own correspondence by the morning half, understood how a gap could glow more brightly than a declaration. In Pride and Prejudice, the withheld papers govern the plot. In life, the withheld papers protect the heart from storms. When Catherine Morland opens the ebony cabinet at Northanger and finds no yellowed bundle of family secrets, the moment sparkles with playful irony, yet behind the jest lies genuine knowledge of loss. Austen has Catherine tease herself for expecting what the author herself could never retrieve, her own youthful letters from Tom, or the letters she might have sent in reply. By satirizing the expectation of sensational documents, Northanger Abbey comments slyly on the audience's hunger for Austen's personal romance, promising nothing more than the echo of discovery, the echo that lingers in an empty drawer smelling faintly of lavender. The text itself whispers the tease, a manuscript of many sheets, written upon, I am sure, in a set hand of full an inch in height. The absurdly large script becomes a gentle nod to readers peering for clues in Austen's miniature handwriting. That playful exaggeration, delivered through Henry Tilney's narrative performance, almost winks at candlelit scholars, inviting them to smile at their own eagerness. Yet beneath the wink lies yearning, for mocking anticipation cannot entirely dismiss it. Absence remains a presence. Laughter, like lace, only partly veils the longing threaded underneath, glistening where the candle burns lowest at midnight. Thus the laugh becomes a lullaby for what is missing. And each time the heroine fails to uncover incriminating parchment, the reader is guided to contemplate how fiction compensates for history's erasures. The hallway at Northanger, with its damp panels and flickering sconces, is not merely architecture. It is the corridor between Austen's own guarded heart and the heart she invites into daylight. What cannot be exhibited can be transformed, shaped into teasing banter, or into the poised silences that stretch between Darcy and Elizabeth, Edmund and Fanny, Emma and her longtime confident silences, humming with unwritten paragraphs of gentle hope. Elsewhere, incompletion stands not as playful parody, but as open wound. In the fragment called The Watsons, the dance abruptly halts. We are left with Emma Watson, newly returned to a family, teetering on the brink of poverty, her prospects clouded, her independence untested. Scholars speculate that the narrative ceased when Austen learned of her father's sudden decline, that the shadow of personal upheaval silenced the story. Whether cause or coincidence, the break feels like a door that remains ajar at twilight. Cool air moving past the jamb while the scene within waits, forever poised to continue in hushed stillness. One can almost hear the faint dialogue that does exist, such as when Mr. Howard observes, "Your sister will not choose to do a disagreeable thing if she can avoid it," and Emma's gentle answer floats back, suggesting a mind both dutiful and daring. The cadence of their exchange hints at affection yet to flower, yet the manuscript ends before a single bloom opens. Here, the romantic subtext is not merely subtle. It is embryonic, a budding cased in green sepals, never warmed by sun, leaving the reader to imagine color, fragrance, and the murmured vows that might have followed. This hush of possibilities, unspooled yet unresolved, lends the fragment a poignancy stronger than completion might provide. The Watsons reveals a doorway toward social commentary, a heroine pressed between duty and desire, reflecting Austen's own suspended courtship, then gently closes the narrative shutters. Lost opportunity haunts both Emma Watson and Jane Austen, each facing corridors not taken, Emma's unclaimed fortune, Jane's undone marriage. Yet, the very absence carves space for musing, for the lull of what-ifs that drift through. Evening parlors where pianoforte chords fade and partners exchange final, lingering bows before parting across gravel drives, silvered by moon-washed pale light. Not all scholars, however, accept the mirrored connection so readily. Some argue that Darcy and Lefroy share only superficial congruence, that Emma Watson's stalled journey owes more to economic caution than to personal grief. that the novels arise from keen observation rather than veiled confession. Others counter that art and life intertwine like climbing roses, one stem offering thorns, the other fragrance, both inseparable along the trellis of experience. The debate itself becomes a soft susurration beneath the text, a scholarly rustle comparable to gowns moving across a ballroom floor, disagreeing yet harmonious in collective curiosity that never quite sleeps. Against that muted disputation, the words on the page resound with their own quiet argument. Listen, for instance, to Elizabeth reading Darcy's letter beneath the shadowy trees at Rosings. "You are too generous to trifle with me. If your feelings are still what they were, you must have perceived they were forcibly manifested. In this confession modestly veiled by formality, desire threads through decorum like a hidden ember brightening parchment. The tremor of authentic sentiment, whether born of invention or recollection, pulses gently, persuading even the most skeptical critic that somewhere a true heart once beat in sympathetic rhythm nearby. Through echo and omission, through satire, fragment, and fervent declaration, Austen weaves a tapestry whose richest colors are sometimes the hues the shuttle never touches. The novels glimmer with conversation, yet between each speech lie recesses where unspoken emotions breathe. Letters appear, yet the missing letters whisper more audibly. Endings satisfy, yet unended stories linger like fragrance on lace gloves locked away. In this twilight union of presence and absence, the fragile outlines of Jane and Tom can be glimpsed, not as definitive portraits, but as silhouettes dancing at the edge of candlelight, dissolving whenever one tries to step closer. Night deepens, and the imagined ballroom falls silent save for the muffled tick of an unseen clock measuring moments, measuring missed chances, measuring the distance between two people who might have spoken more boldly had circumstances allowed. In that slow, deliberate ticking lies the promise of our next turning. We shall follow the clock's patient hands into the broader society that framed these choices, the intricate etiquette of mail coaches, marriage proposals, and morning visits, tracing how external customs sculpt inner inclination. For now, the clock keeps time in shadows, each rhythm a hushed heartbeat awaiting dawn across the quiet field. The lamplight that had danced across the water-stained parchment at the close of the previous episode now settles into a gentle glow, as though the flame itself were pausing to breathe before the next, quieter inquiry begins. A hush drifts through the study, curling round the spines of well-thumbed biographies. Only the faint tick of an elderly mantel clock reminds anyone still awake that time continues to flow, unhurried, beyond the page. During the first decades of the last century, a modest procession of scholars began to treat literary biography less as genteel portraiture and more as patient detection. The tweed-coated figure in an Oxford bay window, the silk-scarved librarian pacing a frost-rimmed courtyard in Bath, the shy provincial teacher writing by lamplight after lessons were marked. All shared a quiet vow to follow every footnote, every smudge of sealing wax. At their desks they spread letters like mapmakers, tracing routes from Chawton to Cork, from Southampton to the lively streets of Dublin, where a youthful Tom Lefroy once argued cases in court. Their tools, at first, were simple magnifying glasses, blotting paper, glassine envelopes for fallen crumbs of ink. But even the simplest tool, yielded by persistent hands, can begin to feel like a sleuth's talisman. Under oblique sunlight they coaxed salt stains to glitter, reasoning that a page splashed with coastal spray must have traveled by packet boat rather than overland coach. They counted iron gall halos and measured quill angles, noting with tender precision that Austen's letters to Cassandra rose by a single, hopeful degree whenever Tom's parliamentary successes found mention. By mid-century chemistry joined the circle, its voice low and measured. Forensic dating first practiced in police laboratories. found a gentle second vocation among literary custodians. Tiny shavings, no broader than the eyelash of a sleeping child, were lifted from discarded ledgers purchased at country house auctions. When the ferric sulfate within the particles darkened under controlled reagents, chemists could chart a curve of oxidation, and, with it, the decade in which a sentence had been set upon the page. The procedure unfolded beneath violet lamps and whirring vent hoods, yet nothing in the room felt clinical. Instead, there was the reverent quiet that falls in a chapel when stained glass softens ordinary noon into colored hush. A single scrap, the size of a sparrow's wing, emerged from an antique bureau sold in Southampton in 1937. On its surface, no more than 5 words could be read. The dance, he smiled again. The script was brisk, bright, unmistakably Austen's. Ink dating placed it in the winter of 1797, the very weeks of her known visits to the Lefroys. Though incomplete, the fragment glowed like a coal rescued from an old hearth, hinting at conversations and laughter now lost to chimney smoke. Biographers, usually cautious, allowed themselves one sigh of wonder before slipping the fragment into a cushioned case lined with dove-gray silk. Across the Atlantic, codebreakers who had served during wartime adapted their punch-card machines for gentler puzzles. In a dim room that smelled faintly of graphite and radio tubes, they trained early algorithms to recognize Austen's looping majuscule A, the tilt of her long S, the impish tick she sometimes set beneath a W. Pages of anonymous 18th century correspondence, long relegated to library attics, passed through the clattering card readers. Now and then the machine's calm bell signaled a likely match, sending a flutter through the watching archivists, much as a nightingale might stir a sleeping grove. The project's success leaned not on speed but on lullaby steadiness. Row after row of characters converted into gentle percussion, like rain on conservatory glass. Out of that quiet persistence arose several orphan pages, one describing a Hampshire orchard in spring, another reflecting on the admirable self-command of Mr. L. Scholars, hearts softened by the discovery, could almost feel the warmth of a May afternoon in the Marjorie orchard, where Jane and Tom were said to linger beneath the white petals. By the 1980s, attention broadened from ink and handwriting to the very paper that held each whispered syllable. A baptismal register from Chawton had noted the arrival of a new paper-making vat in 1793. Centuries later, forensic botanists coaxed DNA from its surviving fibers. Under river-cool microscopes, flax and linen ghosts revealed regional traits, trace elements of Itchen River silt, a whisper of larkspur pollen from neighboring fields. When compared with test fibers lifted from suspect pages, a family resemblance emerged as unmistakable as the curve of a cousin's smile. The procedure was conducted by gloved hands under lamplight gentler than dawn. Scalpels parted ragged margins, releasing tufts so small they trembled like thistledown. Enzymes lulled the fibers into surrendering their code, base pairs sliding into gentle alignment. The results often confirmed provenance. Occasionally they contradicted tidy catalogues, urging historians to reopen trunks and card files, and, sometimes, the assumptions of a lifetime. One such reopening occurred in County Longford, where a stone-built parsonage slumbers beside fields of soft barley. Its attic, lined with cedar planks, had remained untouched through 2 wars, 3 property sales, and countless seasons of steadfast rain tapping at the roof slates. There, on a morning washed in pale weatherlight, a modern researcher coat buttoned to the chin against the attic's chill lifted the lid of a steamer trunk, whose leather straps had relaxed into gentle curves. Dust rose in a sleepy swirl, catching the sunbeam that slanted through a narrow eyebrow window. Within the trunk lay gowns folded like pressed blossom theater programs, fragile as dried autumn leaves, and, near the bottom, a packet of letters secured by twine the color of old ivory. The handwriting on the outermost cover bore no signature, Only a looping L that could have belonged to Lefroy or to any of a dozen Longford cousins. Fingers, steady despite the heart's subtle quickening, teased the twine free. A faint scent of lavender water drifted up, as if the past had taken care to perfume its arrival. The letters themselves may yet prove ordinary dinner menus, charitable accounts, sermons, but their paper, wattled and watermark bright, will travel soon to a laboratory that hums like distant bees. There, chromographs and spectrometers will listen for echoes of the Charton Mill, while software maps every curl and cross-stroke. Each discipline in its turn offers the same quiet pledge, to let the evidence speak softly without presumption or haste. Back in the attic, the researcher replaces the garments, smoothing lace against velvet as though tucking grandchildren beneath quilts, then descends the narrow stairs. The house settles behind, beams creaking with the contentment of an old cello set aside after a largo. In the hedgerows outside, evening thrushes adjust their wings for roosting, their song already thinning towards silence. History has always belonged as much to rhythm as to revelation. Footsteps measured along a corridor of archives, the patient drip of reagent into porcelain trays, the incremental breath of a chest lifting to turn another fragile sheet each. Small cadence contributes to the larger opus of understanding. And somewhere within that opus, perhaps, folded still inside lavender-scented twine, lies a sentence in which Tom calls Jane by an endearment never before recorded, or a jest she fires back with laughing brevity. If such lines appear, they will do so, not with fanfare, but with the modest glow of a distant hearth glimpsed across evening fields. For now the chapter closes like a well-made box, hinges sighing shut, contents secure, yet promising future discovery. Beyond the study windows, the night deepens into velvety hush, the mantel clock steady as a heart at rest. In the next chapter, the journey will drift southward, toward a riverside manor where winter roses once frama a frosted conservatory, an unlikely greenhouse that may yet reveal the final whisper of their unsealed hearts. The candle we left glimmering at the close of the previous chapter still breathes upon the dim air, wax drips like hesitant snow, and the half-unfolded letter lies unchanged, yet everything around it has aged by a single, unhurried beat. From that small pool of lamplight we wander outward, following two once-entwined destinies that have drifted onto separate roads. The hush remains complete. Even the clock behind the wainscot scarcely dares to tick. Time, however, continues its gentle persuasion, guiding youthful promise toward the measured cadence of later years, where triumph strolls beside tenderness and regret in quiet parity tonight. Jane's later years unspooled amid the tempered beauty of Hampshire lanes, where hedgerows browned and blossomed in faithful sequence while her body faltered beneath an unnamed weight. She wrote at a small walnut table, sliding every fresh page beneath a blotter whenever footsteps neared, still surprised by the old impulse toward secrecy. Nephews invaded the parlor with glorious racket, and laughter rose easily, yet at twilight her energy ebbed and the bones of her fingers throbbed. Sentences nonetheless sang inside her mind, arranging themselves into bright processions she guided onto paper with unwavering economic grace, even on the frailest mornings. Publication arrived like unexpectedly gentle sunlight. Sense and sensibility introduced her voice. Pride and Prejudice confirmed it. Anonymous only in print, never in discernment. Reviews drifted in like discreet bouquets, praising wit, compassion, crystalline dialogue. Coins finally clinked where careful economy had long reigned. Small luxuries, a muslin collar, a silver penknife, ripened peaches out of season were purchased with smiling disbelief. Jane accepted success placidly, aware of weather's caprice. She wrote, then walked the garden, noting bird-call intervals as though they were rests within her compositions. Fame remained distant, polite, and she preferred it so, to keep serenity safely at home. Yet triumph did not erase remembrance. It merely polished certain mornings to a reflective sheen, while trimming endings. Jane sometimes paused, heard distant bells, and felt again the exhilaration of a winter dance long ago. Candlelight mirrored off polished floors, music whirled, and a bright pair of Irish eyes caught her breath. She would adjust her pen and continue, but the echo lingered, threading each elegant sentence with a subtle undertone of possibility deferred. Within that gentle undertow lay neither bitterness nor yearning, only a quiet acknowledgement of how deeply brief moments can cast lasting shadows across an entire lifetime. Illness gathered by quiet increments. First a heaviness on waking, then fevered flushes, then the confidential hush of physicians offering tonics tasting of iron and despair. Windows framed drifting mist. She watched it and considered how people, too, drift past one another. Dying, she refined manuscripts, guided her niece's embroideries, and wrote letters bright with mischief. Yet sometimes a line faltered, and Cassandra looked up to find Jane gazing at nothing, lips parted as though addressing someone too distant to answer. Even pain could not dull her wit, but it thinned the veil between present and remembrance, for them both. Across the sea, in Dublin's oak-panelled courts, echoing with measured footsteps, Thomas Lefroy rose from articulate novice to assured advocate. Benches praised his crystalline reasoning, newspaper columnists, his courteous dismantling of opposition. Each accolade brought heavier responsibilities, which he met with disciplined grace that barely concealed ambition's lightning. In weathered notebooks, he drafted legislation, annotations curling like vines around printed statutes, margins where thought breathed freely. During recess, he sometimes drifted to a window, watching rain stripe the pavement, sensing another landscape beyond the horizon, green and remembered, humming faintly inside the precise machinery of present duty. At his pulse, marriage arrived as society expected. Mary Paul, gentle and composed, brought him affection and the means for higher office. Their household sounds were polished, clinking glass, measured laughter, children rehearsing catechism beside a disciplined fire. Among those children lingers rumor of a daughter christened Jane, homage uttered perhaps without Mary's full understanding. Family letters hint but never confirm, yet a baptismal entry at St. Patrick's bears faded ink that resembles the name, the loops uncertain, the clerk's hand shaking in December cold. Whether coincidence or confession, the possibility hovers, delicate as breath upon winter glass, awaiting discovery by future careful eyes. Success thrust Tom into salons bright with argument and candle smoke. Yet during solitary walks across Merrion Square, he felt memory draw near. He wore his past like a discreet cameo beneath appointed robes, almost unseen, always known. Sometimes a phrase in court summoned laughter that another mind could have shared. The echo faded, leaving a minor ache precisely shaped like absence. He did not indulge the feeling, but neither could he banish it. In the hush between closing books and extinguishing lamps, he whispered her surname once, perhaps twice, watching it dissolve harmlessly into the chimney draught that night. Time, obliging and relentless, gathered its silent trophies. In a carved box among Lefroy possessions lies a narrow ribbon binding several strands of dark hair, each filament veined with auburn when held to light. The label is torn, the handwriting softened by fingertips, yet two letters J and A still breathe through the paper like frost ghosts. Elsewhere, in a desk belonging to Jane's niece Fanny, rests a portrait miniature no larger than a watch. The sitter wears a filmy shawl and an expression balanced between mischief and reserve, as though amused by secrets entirely her own. Guarded within a painted hush, the miniature's provenance remains contested. Some declared an Irish cousin. Others insist upon a youthful likeness of Tom, tenderly romanticized. What endures is the way the sitter's gaze tilts beyond the frame, considering someone who hovers just outside the painted space. Gilded edges are scuffed, yet the varnish still kindles morning light, releasing color with surprising freshness. Observers report feeling watched in return, as if the subject and the unseen companion remained locked in quiet colloquy, conversation inaudible, yet ongoing, a slow heartbeat suspended between pigment layers, resilient against the creeping fade of decades and the observer's restless thoughts. Equally eloquent, though absent of image, are the asides Tom penciled into his professional volumes. Cotton's Commentaries bears marginal questions beside statutes on dowry, the graphite pausing, resuming with a dash and the word impracticable underlined twice. On page 94, a note wonders, would J.A. approve? Scholars later suggested the initials refer to Justice Alexander, yet the oldest script nests against paragraphs discussing property rights for women, and the mystery persists like a soft candle behind frosted glass. Ink may speak boldly, but pencil half erased often hums truer, carrying hesitation, hope, and the flicker of withheld confession from margins. Of all relics, none invites warmer speculation than the bundle of unsent letters reportedly discovered in Tom's study after his death. The tale survives through a descendant, pale sheets folded but unsealed, tied with ordinary twine, each addressed to Miss Jane Austen, Sharton. No text was revealed. Family discretion consigned them, still unread, to a locked drawer. Whether fire, water, or forgetfulness later removed them, silence now testifies. Yet the mere possibility breathes, fragrant as unopened lavender, encouraging listeners to imagine pages where youthful ardor matured into tempered affection, thought refining, feeling the way moonlight refines color within sealed absence. One pictures the elder Judge Lefroy at dusk, weary from parliamentary sittings, returning to those letters for a moment's companionship. Perhaps, having read, he lacked boldness to send, yet lacked resolve to destroy. Thus they survived in suspended present, each page white as chapel marble, each sentence stalled a heartbeat before arrival. When final illness came, he might have requested them, touching paper edges the way a musician idly brushes silent strings, hearing within an ear a melody no other living soul could hear. Such private resonance needs no audience. Breath and memory suffice for a last quiet evening together. The story of separate lives is seldom tragic. Most days pass in duties that feel, within their season, entirely sufficient. Yet in the intervals between duties an ache often forms, gentle but insistent, shaped exactly like what was once possible. Jane sensed it when her gaze drifted beyond the hedgerow. Tom sensed it when laughter in court echoed, awaiting the response of a mind no longer near. Regret, in such seasoned hearts, is not self-reproach, nor wish for reversal, but a courteous nod toward the branch in the road where two sets of footsteps vanished in differing directions that day. Now the candle on our desk settles into its final shallow ring flame, miniature, yet unwavering. The half-unfolded letter glows translucent, ink lifting toward light as though longing to be read aloud. We turn away for the present, leaving certain words unspoken, threads lightly woven, for one corridor remains, the journey of those missing letters themselves, from hearth to archive, from whispered rumor to the patient hands that may yet uncover them. Let night hold its breath a moment longer. Morning will guide us gently forward, where faded paper perhaps reveals a last, softened truth, awaiting tender daylight's careful unveiling. The candle we left glowing beside the ink-blotted desk has burned lower, its flame now a mere golden bead clinging to the wick, yet the soft radiance continues to halo the forgotten quill and the stack of unanswered questions. From that hush we wander onward, letting the diminishing light guide us into the spacious night where letters long mislaid drift, like paper moons, quietly reflecting hopes that were never fully penned. It is a fitting realm for parting thoughts. For tonight we linger among absences and discover how much tenderness can echo inside a single missing page. In every archive, Even the most diligently kept, there are pockets of silence gaps where dates fade, ink evaporates, or entire correspondences vanish between estate sales and attic clear-outs. Jane Austen's life is threaded with such silences, yet none glimmer so brightly as the vanished letters exchanged during her bright understanding with the young Irish barrister Tom Lefroy. 4 winter weeks, a handful of surviving sentences, and then white space wide enough to cradle centuries of speculation. Rather than frustrate the heart, that space seems to invite it, coaxing imaginations to wander the snow-dusted lanes of Steventon with 2 figures whose laughter was real, even if the record of it is not. The very incompleteness turns historians into storytellers and casual readers into careful listeners, leaning closer to catch what the paper no longer says. There is an ancient comfort in piecing together ruins. A half-collapsed stone arch, a tapestry frayed beyond recognition. These artifacts stir a curious warmth, precisely because they give the mind permission to finish their patterns. Missing letters function the same way. The handwriting ends mid-phrase, and suddenly anyone might supply the next flourish of the pen. One person conjures a shy confession, another an argument quickly cooled by laughter. Whole volumes of possibility unfurl where a single line is lost. Such freedom feels cozy, even protective, allowing private dreams to nest safely in the hush no document can contradict. Thus, a void becomes a hearth, and each unrecorded moment a quiet, glowing coal. Cozy historical mysteries have long understood this hearth-like power of incomplete tales. By candlelight, an imagined librarian lifts a fragile bundle of ribboned letters, discovers gaps between postmarks, and sets about solving not a violent crime, but the sweeter riddle of why a spirited young woman chose silence after one last winter dance. The stakes are rarely mortal. Instead, they are tender. Can the past still offer solace? Can a modern heart learn trust? By tracing the faint pulse of an old romance, writers of such mysteries tuck readers beneath patchwork quilts of fact and fancy, serving tea-warm chapters laced with archival dust. Because the evidence is partial, everyone moves gently, mindful of paper edges and emotional echoes. The absence of certainty gives permission for kindness, and the story's suspense arises not from danger, but from the hope that empathy will be enough to bridge the years. Academic scholars, amateur genealogists, and twilight readers alike share this instinctive hush before a missing page. Yet technology now widens the circle, letting thousands join the patient search without ever leaving their own lamplit rooms. Digital crowdsourcing projects have begun to map every known Austen letter, scanning estate inventories, auction catalogues, and family scrapbooks for stray phrases that might belong to that elusive winter of 1796. A single leaf lies folded within a music book or is pressed flat behind the portrait of a cousin whose name time has nearly forgotten. On shed screens, volunteers tilt grayscale images, looking for watermark shadows and familiar loops of Austen's L. Each discovery, no matter how small, sparks a gentle ripple through the virtual reading room. And for a moment, screens feel like windows onto one communal desk strewn with 18th century ribbons. What fascinates, however, is not only the promise of closure, but the serene knowledge that final answers may never arrive. The search itself becomes a lullaby, a slow, meticulous turning of virtual pages, a steady rhythm of curiosity soothed by patience. In that rhythm, participants sense how stories can be sustained not by revelation, but by respectful wondering. A crowd of strangers learns to breathe together, their collective pauses as meaningful as the lines they decipher. When a project newsletter announces that another leaf remains stubbornly missing, there is no disappointment, only the gentle thrill of further invitation. The blank space, once again, welcomes everyone back to the circle of possibility. This cultural affection for partial stories extends beyond Austen. Scholars of folklore note that fireside tales often end with an image half-sketched, a lingering footprint in the snow, a door left ajar so that listeners carry the ember home and keep it burning in private thought. Painters leave portions of canvas unvarnished. Composers let diminished chords hover unresolved. We do not merely tolerate incompletion. We cherish it because it trusts us with quiet authority. A finished artifact closes like a padlock, but an imperfect one leaves the gate unlatched, urging slow twilight wandering. In the field of literary enchantment, the missing letter is less a loss than a promise, gently postponed. Across centuries, the romance between Jane and Tom lingers in this fruitful mist. Some imagine they parted willingly, choosing duty over desire. Others believe fate intervened, or that later letters were burned in a protective blaze. Each theory tells us as much about the dreamer as about the dreamer. The uncertain outlines allow each reader to hang personal lanterns along the path. They illuminate their own record partings, their own moments of what might have been. In this way, an historical gap becomes a mirror, and the boyish barrister dancing in borrowed gloves becomes every first love too brief to catalogue. Cozy mystery novelists, knitting circles, and gentle video essays, like the one now closing, all rely on that reflective magic. It is the reason a small channel named the Cashmere Chronicles could devote 9 full evenings to examining a romance substantiated by only a handful of sentences, and still find more to say. Each conversation, whether whispered over embroidery or typed under a low-brightness lamp, feeds the collective tapestry, interlacing threads of empathy through centuries and pixels alike. The archive grows warmer, not merely larger, because every retelling is offered with care. Perhaps, then, the true legacy of a quiet passion is not the hidden letter we hope to uncover, but the listening stance we adopt while we wait. It teaches us to read traces, to respect what cannot be forced into daylight, and to sense the dignity of another's privacy even while we yearn for closeness. That gentle discipline slips easily into everyday life. Cherishing a friend's pause as much as their speech. Accepting that a loved one's history may include rooms we never enter. Finding serenity in the simple fact that some mysteries choose to remain softly lit rather than fully explained. Now, as the final minutes drift across this chapter, imagine a last montage drawn with deliberate quiet. Somewhere, a clerk in soft wool sleeves finishes indexing a parcel of correspondence and sets aside their pen. The quill scratches once more, lifts and is still. A hush follows, then the faintest rustle as a book is opened, thin pages, lifting and falling like slow wings. Another pair of hands repeats the motion, and another, until the subtle percussion of turning leaves seems to fill a dimly lit hall. The shot widens, shelves recede into shadows, broken only by the tremor of candlelight reflecting off gilt titles. No voices speak, for the story now belongs to any soul who chooses to keep looking. That, dear guest of our 10-night ramble, is where we leave you standing comfortably at the threshold of silence, equipped with curiosity, but never hurried. The mystery is not solved, it is simply offered. The lamp of imagination remains lit, awaiting the next pair of thoughtful eyes. Whether you rise tomorrow to join a crowdsourced transcription, pick up a well-thumbed novel, or merely smile at the memory of 2 young dancers lost in a January snowfall, the warmth will be the same, for it comes from the listening posture itself. Keep it close, and the quiet passion will continue to glow. As the final image fades, the camera lingers on one small desk, a folded sheet, blank on both sides, resting beside an inkwell. Moonlight slips across its surface, as though inviting words that may never be written. Yet the page is enough. Its emptiness hums with gathered potential, and the soft night accepts it without question. Let the screen dim gradually, allowing the gentle percussion of imagined pages to drift into your room. In that tender hush, stories can still begin, or perhaps simply breathe, waiting for you at whatever pace you choose to turn the next leaf.